another Contaflex repair video. This time it's a Contaflex II. If you try this yourself, be careful and do it on your own risk. So the Contaflex II is very similar to the Contaflex I, just it has a selenium light meter. So most of the steps that I'm going to do can also be projected to the Contaflex I. Well, there is an exception, which is the very early Contaflex ones. They are not so common, but here's an example of those, and you can identify it by the where there's no light, there's no self-timer, and also the series of the shutter speeds is different to the later models. So for example, here you have 12510 and here you have 1248. And the reason why I mention this is because the shutter in this camera is so much different to this shutter, even though they are called the same, such that many steps would be different. The camera fires, but as you can see, the aperture closes down way too slowly. So that is one thing I'm going to fix. Also, the shutter speed times are a bit too slow. This is not really dramatic, so sometimes even after an adjustment I don't get better results than this, but I hope that I can improve this to be a bit faster, so it has less deviation to the actual time. All in all, this camera is very dusty and dirty inside. You can only see that looking through the viewfinder. There's probably a lot of dust on the ground glass, maybe also the mirror, and also as usual inside the body, which you cannot see, but it's there, so I want to clean it. On later Contaflex models, it's quite easy to remove just the shutter unit and repair that and put it back, and then it works again. But especially on the Contaflex I and II, that's not so easy, and I tend to clean everything and also disassemble everything, because it just cannot remove that easily without disassembling everything. The reason for that is the following. To remove the shutter unit from the shutter plate, you'll need to unscrew this ring, and well, you need a very special tool to do this without damaging anything like the lens or the black color inside, and I don't like to do that. In later Contaflex models, there's screws here that hold the shutter unit to the shutter plate, so it's easier to just remove that. The screws you see here do not hold the shutter unit itself. They have a different purpose, so I will not recommend to remove them right now. So the first thing I would do for disassembling is removing the ring for the front lens, and that can be removed by first unscrewing this screw and that screw. Now the next step is a bit tricky, because there's 3 screws underneath this ring, and you need a very small screwdriver like this. Locate the screws by turning the ring and looking through the hole, and when you located it, you can try to loosen it. Be very patient, have a lot of patience there. That's nothing that should be forced, and you can see that they are loosened enough once you can lift this ring here. There's the first screw. Before loosening the other screws, I like to set it to a defined setting, something like infinity, or this would be infinity. No, this would be infinity. Turn it like to the end. I'm just doing it because when I lift it, I want to see where those screws align to the front lens, and I need to insert it back at the same position when I assemble it back together. I have now loosened the 3 screws, so I can now carefully lift this up. Okay, so what should be visible now is that each of the 3 screws went into one of those holes. Now, confusingly, there's also more holes because probably in the past someone else made more. But I want to insert it at the exact same hole again. So I need to figure out a way to document in which position the ring goes back. A good way to do this is to leave a mark on both sides, so when they match I can be sure they are in the correct position. Luckily I already have a mark over here. I don't know if it's visible, but for me it's visible, and I still need a mark on this hole, and then I know they are matching. So that should be easy to identify. Okay. I will now continue with removing the cover plate. To do so, I start with this knob on the side of the exposure meter. And to remove this knob here, you need to be very careful because there's a spring and a very small ball underneath it that can easily jump out. So first I remove this screw. And then I open the back. And while holding this fork, I rotate the knob by 90 degrees counterclockwise. And while doing that, be very careful, because once you rotate it at 90 degrees, there's going to be a spring-loaded ball that jumps out unless you keep it there with your thumb, for example. So I'm now covering the spot with my thumb. And there's the ball that jumped out. This was very critical, but I'm very happy that it didn't jump so far. So be very, very careful with this. And there's the spring. but I leave it there for now. Now I should be able to lift this. I also remove this little spring here and put it in a safe spot so I cannot lose it. The next steps are not so difficult. Now I will continue in removing the accessory shoe. As well as this ring here. I have a special tool for that. If you don't have a special tool, it can be difficult. Just be careful to not damage the circular shape of the ring. Next, the rewind knob. There's 3 screws on the sides. Now this piece, there's again 3 screws. I keep it in the reach because I'm going to put it back once I lift it off the cover plate, so it will be easier to wind the shutter again. But now, last but not least, I remove this screw and then the cover plate should be removable. So the first thing you can see, this is always the case. The rubber foam for the light meter is very old and dry, and this stuff just comes off and makes everything dirty. Second thing I see is they used rubber foam between the viewfinder and the prism, and I would never do that, because at least people think that this can attack the prism and damage some of it. So I will remove this, and there's completely no necessity for being any type of rubber foam here. Don't lose this piece. Sometimes it also has a washer underneath, in this case not, but it is necessary as a spacer when you screw the cover plate, and the cover plate rests on this piece. I'm wondering, because often there's also such a piece on this side, but I don't see one. And it doesn't seem necessary for this model because there's no space. Okay, now I put back this thing as I said, just to make it easier to wind the shutter again. To fire the shutter, I need to press this little pin here. Good. Next I will remove the prism. That can be removed by 3 screws, 1, 2, 3, and be very careful for the washers that are underneath each screw, because the washers need to be put back at the exact same spot when you assemble the prism back. That's because they used different washers of different heights to adjust the height of the ground glass. Right now I'm wondering, because I don't yet see any washers. That's unusual. But there is one. And what I always like to do is I take a note for the front left, front back and right screw, and attach the washer with a piece of tape. So now there's no way I can mix things up when I assemble it. Yeah, but there's no washer here. Again, no washer here. Okay. So what can be seen here is that there is a lot of, well, weird stuff going on in the prism. And that's quite common for the old Contaflex Is and IIs, that the prism is not perfect anymore. But this stuff is not seeable when you look through the viewfinder, because it's not in the focus area, and you simply never focus on that stuff. In the worst case, however, the ugly areas can also be in the focus area, and that makes the prism unusable anymore. At least I don't have a way to restore it. It would need to be replaced.